Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into something that can be kind of tough to talk about.
Okay.
Harmful family members.
Right.
And, I think we all know someone who
Hmm.
has a difficult family, or maybe we've even experienced it ourselves.
Yeah.
And you've sent in some really interesting research on the topic.
Okay.
And I'm excited to unpack it all with our expert here.
Yeah.
This deep dive is all about giving you the tools to recognize harmful behavior and protect yourself.
Right.
And going through these sources, I was
Mhm.
struck by how subtle some of these harmful actions can be.
Yeah.
Like those seemingly innocent backhanded compliments or being excluded from family events.
Yeah.
It's not always obvious.
Right.
So how do we even begin to identify these behaviors?
That's a great place to start
Yeah.
because you're right. It's often not clear cut.
Right.
I think a good starting point is to define what we mean by harmful.
Okay.
It's not just about the big dramatic blowouts.
Yep.
It's a spectrum of behaviors that consistently undermine your well-being.
Got it.
These actions, intentional or not, can chip away at your self-esteem,
Yeah.
create anxiety, and even impact your physical health.
So it's this ongoing pattern of negativity that can be really insidious.
Yeah.
And you mentioned physical health,
Yeah.
which is something I hadn't really considered before.
Right.
Is there research that connects the dots between these harmful family dynamics and actual physical ailments?
There is, and it's fascinating.
Okay.
Studies have shown that chronic stress, which is often a byproduct of these relationships,
Mm-hmm.
can manifest in a whole host of physical symptoms.
Oh, wow.
You might see things like headaches,
Right.
digestive issues,
Wow.
even weakened immunity. It's like your body is internalizing all that emotional turmoil.
That's a pretty compelling reason to pay attention to this stuff.
Yeah.
But let's get back to recognizing these behaviors.
Sure.
The source material actually outlined 8 specific signs of harmful intentions. I have to admit, some of them were a bit surprising.
It's true. They can be subtle and often disguised as something else entirely.
Right.
Take, for instance, consistent negative behavior.
Okay.
This might be disguised as tough love
Mm-hmm.
or even humor,
Oh, yeah.
but it's a constant drip of negativity that erodes your confidence over time.
Ah, the classic, I'm just telling you this for your own good routine.
Right.
I think we've all been on the receiving end of that one at some point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you have things like exclusionary actions.
Okay.
This can be really painful because it sends the message that you don't belong,
Right.
that you're not fully accepted by the family.
Right.
It might be something as blatant as not being invited to events or as subtle as being left out of conversations.
It's almost like being slowly erased from the family picture,
Right?
which can be incredibly isolating.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
That sense of isolation is a common thread through many of these harmful behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Think about manipulation, for example.
Yeah.
This is all about control.
Okay.
Using guilt trips, playing the victim, or even outright threats to get what they want.
That's a tough one because family relationships are already so emotionally charged.
Yeah.
It can be really hard to separate genuine concern from manipulative tactics.
It certainly can be.
Yeah.
And then there's backhanded compliments,
Right.
which are a masterclass in passive aggression.
Okay.
These are those remarks that seem like praise on the surface, but actually contain a subtle dig or put down.
Uh-huh.
They leave you feeling confused and unsure of yourself.
Like, you look great for your age type of comments.
Precisely.
Oh.
It's a way of undermining your confidence without being overtly critical.
What about gossip?
Yeah,
That seems like a pretty common tactic in family conflicts.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Spreading rumors or negative information about you to other family members is a way of damaging your reputation and creating division within the family.
Right.
It's a way to isolate you further and make you feel like you can't trust anyone.
It's a very insidious form of manipulation.
It is.
You mentioned isolation earlier.
Yeah.
It seems like that's a common goal of many of these harmful behaviors.
It often is.
Okay.
When you're isolated, you're more vulnerable and easier to control.
Right.
It's a tactic that's sadly quite effective.
Yeah.
And speaking of control, another sign to watch out for is sabotage.
What?
This is when a family member actively tries to undermine your efforts, whether it's in your career,
Right.
your relationships, or even your personal goals.
So this goes beyond just words.
Yes.
They're actually taking actions to hinder your success or happiness.
Exactly.
Wow.
It could be anything from subtle undermining to outright interference.
Okay.
And the impact can be devastating, especially if you're already feeling vulnerable or lacking in support.
It's almost like they're trying to hold you back from reaching your full potential.
In a way, yes.
Right.
And that can be particularly damaging to your self-esteem and your belief in yourself.
So we've covered negative behavior, exclusion, manipulation, backhanded compliments, gossip, and sabotage. That's 6 out of the 8 signs. What are the last 2 we should be aware of?
The last 2 are lack of empathy and jealousy.
Okay.
Now, a lack of empathy in a family member can be one of the most hurtful things to experience.
Right.
It's that inability or unwillingness to understand or share your feelings.
Yeah.
You might share your struggles or successes only to be met with indifference or dismissal.
That's got to be so invalidating.
It is.
Yeah, it's like your experiences don't even matter to them.
Exactly.
Right.
And it can make you question your own perceptions and feel like you're overreacting or being too sensitive.
And lastly, we have jealousy.
Right?
I think we all experience jealousy from time to time, but how does it manifest in a harmful way within family dynamics?
Well, healthy jealousy is usually fleeting and doesn't impact our actions.
Right.
But within families, jealousy can become deeply ingrained and lead to destructive behaviors.
Okay.
That might be envy of your accomplishments, your possessions, or even the attention you receive from other family members.
So it's not really about you at all.
No.
It's about their own insecurities and their need to feel superior.
Precisely.
Okay.
And this can be one of the most challenging aspects of dealing with a harmful family member because their actions are often driven by deep-seated emotional issues that are difficult to address.
Right.
It really is a complex issue. And, it's interesting. So one of the sources you shared delves into the psychological underpinnings of these behaviors,
Okay.
specifically looking at how childhood experiences and attachment styles can influence these patterns in adulthood.
That's really intriguing. I know a bit about attachment theory, but how does it tie into harmful family dynamics?
Well, the basic idea is that our early relationships with our caregivers shape our beliefs about ourselves and the world.
Okay.
If those early relationships were marked by inconsistency, neglect, or even abuse, it can lead to insecure attachment styles.
So if someone grew up in an environment where their needs weren't met or where they were constantly criticized, that can make them more likely to engage in harmful behaviors as adults.
It's certainly a factor. And it's not just about the people who exhibit these behaviors,
Yeah.
but also about those who are on the receiving end.
Okay.
If you grew up with a parent who was emotionally manipulative, for example, you might be more likely to tolerate that kind of behavior in other relationships, even if it's detrimental to your well-being.
It's almost like a cycle of dysfunction that gets passed down through generations.
Exactly. But the good news is that awareness is the first step to breaking that cycle.
Right.
By understanding these patterns, we can start to make more conscious choices in our relationships and set healthier boundaries.
That's a really hopeful message. So we've talked about recognizing these harmful behaviors and understanding some of the underlying psychology.
Right.
But what can someone actually do to protect themselves from the negative impact of these relationships?
Well, there are a number of strategies, and I think it's important to emphasize that there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
What works for one person might not work for another.
Okay.
So it's really about finding what feels right for you.
That makes sense. It's about empowering people to take control of their own well-being.
Precisely. And one of the most powerful tools we have is the ability to set boundaries.
Okay.
This is about clearly communicating what you will and will not tolerate.
Right.
It might involve limiting contact with the person refusing to engage in certain topics of conversation, or even walking away from a situation that's becoming toxic.
Setting boundaries with family can be tricky, though. There's often this expectation that you have to tolerate certain behaviors because of their family.
You're absolutely right.
Right.
And that's where the concept of emotional detachment comes in.
Okay.
It's not about cutting people off completely or becoming cold and heartless.
Right.
It's about protecting yourself from their negativity.
So it's more about managing your own emotional response rather than trying to change the other person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it can be incredibly freeing to realize that you don't have to take on their emotions, their drama, or their dysfunction.
Right.
You can choose to stay neutral, to observe without absorbing.
And I imagine that takes a lot of practice, especially if you've been conditioned to take on those roles within the family.
It does. And it's not always easy,
Right.
but there are specific techniques that can help.
Okay.
For example, gray rocking is a technique that's often used with narcissists or highly manipulative individuals.
Okay.
It's about becoming as uninteresting and unreactive as a gray rock.
Huh. Interesting.
Essentially making yourself a less desirable target for their manipulation.
Wow. So you're not giving them the emotional reaction they're looking for.
Exactly.
Mm.
And over time, they often lose interest and move on to someone who's more willing to play their game.
That's fascinating. Are there other techniques that people can use to protect themselves in the heat of the moment?
There are. One that I find particularly helpful is called the broken record technique.
Okay.
It's about repeating the same phrase or boundary over and over again,
Yeah.
calmly and consistently, without getting drawn into an argument or explanation.
So if someone is trying to guilt trip you into doing something you don't want to do, you simply repeat your boundary like, I'm not comfortable with that, or I've already made other plans.
Exactly. And the key is to stay calm and assertive, even if they become angry or frustrated.
That sounds challenging, but I can see how it would be effective.
It can be very effective. And the more you practice these techniques, the easier it becomes to stay grounded in your own power,
Right.
even in the face of challenging situations.
You know, we've talked a lot about what individuals can do to protect themselves, but what about the role of therapy or professional support? When is it a good idea to seek outside help?
That's a great question. And I think therapy can be incredibly beneficial in these situations.
Okay.
It provides a safe space to process your emotions, develop coping mechanisms, and gain a deeper understanding of the dynamics at play within your family.
So it's not just for people who are struggling with mental health issues, but also for anyone who wants to navigate these challenging relationships in a healthier way.
Exactly. And a therapist can also help you develop a plan for setting boundaries, communicating more effectively, and even working towards reconciliation, if that's a possibility.
You mentioned reconciliation. Is that something that's always possible or even desirable in these situations?
That's a really nuanced question, and I think it depends on a lot of factors.
Okay.
In some cases, reconciliation might be possible if the harmful family member is willing to acknowledge their behavior, take responsibility, and make genuine efforts to change.
But that requires a lot of self-awareness and willingness on their part, which isn't always present.
You're right. And in some cases, it might not be safe or healthy to pursue reconciliation.
You're right.
Sometimes the best course of action is to create distance, either physically or emotionally, to protect yourself from further harm.
That can be a really difficult decision to make, especially when it involves close family members.
It absolutely can be. And it's important to remember that you have the right to prioritize your own well-being, even if it means creating some distance from family.
And I imagine that guilt can play a huge role in these situations.
It often does. Many people feel guilty for setting boundaries or distancing themselves, even when it's clearly in their best interest.
Right.
And that's where self-compassion comes in.
What do you mean by self-compassion in this context?
It's about treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer a friend who is going through a similar situation.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that you're doing the best you can with a difficult situation.
Right.
And that you deserve to be treated with respect and compassion.
That's such an important message. It's so easy to get caught up in self-blame and judgment, especially when dealing with family issues.
It really is. But remember, you didn't choose these dynamics. You didn't create this situation.
Right.
And you're not responsible for fixing it.
Right.
Your responsibility is to take care of yourself and make choices that support your own well-being.
That's a really empowering way to look at it. So we've talked about setting boundaries, emotional detachment therapy, and even the possibility of reconciliation. Right.
Are there any other strategies that can help people navigate these challenging family dynamics?
There are. One that I think is often overlooked is the power of building a strong support system outside of the family.
Okay.
This could be friends, a partner, a mentor, a support group, or even a therapist.
Right.
The key is to surround yourself with people who understand what you're going through, offer encouragement, and remind you of your worth.
It's like creating a chosen family that can counterbalance some of that negativity you're experiencing in your biological family.
Exactly. And these supportive relationships can be a lifeline, especially when you're feeling isolated or overwhelmed.
Right.
They can help you gain perspective, build confidence, and remind you that you're not alone in this journey.
You know, one of the sources you sent mentioned the concept of finding meaning or even lessons in these difficult family experiences.
Right.
That seems like a tall order when you're in the midst of it all.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
That's a really profound point, and I think it speaks to the resilience of the human spirit.
Even in the face of adversity, even in the most painful situations, we have the capacity to find meaning, to learn, and to grow.
So it's about looking for those silver linings even when the clouds seem pretty dark.
Precisely. And it's not about minimizing the pain or pretending that everything is okay.
Right.
It's about recognizing that even the most challenging experiences can offer valuable lessons and opportunities for growth.
I'm wondering, what are some of the most common lessons that people tend to learn from these experiences with harmful family members?
Well, I think one of the most profound lessons is the importance of boundaries.
Okay.
Many people realize that they've been allowing others to overstep their boundaries for years,
Yeah.
and they finally learn to say no and protect their own emotional space.
That can be a real game changer, especially in families where enmeshment or codependency is present.
It absolutely can be.
Yeah.
It's about reclaiming your own autonomy and recognizing that you have the right to make choices that are in your best interests.
And what about self-care? It seems like that's something that often gets neglected when people are caught up in family drama.
You're so right. Many people have been conditioned to put the needs of others before their own, and they end up depleted and exhausted.
Right.
But dealing with a harmful family member often forces you to prioritize your own well-being.
Okay.
It becomes a matter of survival.
It's that classic metaphor of putting on your own oxygen mask first before helping others.
Exactly. And that can be a really transformative experience because it teaches you to value yourself, to set limits, and to make your own well-being a priority.
And finally, I'm curious about forgiveness. Is that something that's even possible or desirable when dealing with a harmful family member?
That's a complex question, and I think it's important to clarify what we mean by forgiveness.
Okay.
It doesn't mean condoning the behavior or pretending that the harm didn't happen.
Right.
It's about releasing the anger and resentment that are keeping you stuck in the past.
So it's more about freeing yourself than it is about absolving the other person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy.
Right. It can be a long and difficult process,
Okay.
but it can be incredibly healing to let go of that bitterness and make peace with the past.
This has been such an insightful conversation, but I think we need to pause here for a moment to let all of this sink in. We'll be back shortly to wrap up our deep dive into recognizing and protecting yourself from harmful family members. Welcome back to the show. We've been having such a thought-provoking conversation about recognizing and protecting ourselves from harmful family members.
It is a topic that resonates with so many people.
Yeah,
I think the insights from these sources you've shared can be truly empowering.
I completely agree. Before the break, we were talking about the power of forgiveness and how it can be part of the healing process.
Right.
But I think it's important to acknowledge that forgiveness isn't always possible
Mm-hmm.
or even appropriate in every situation.
You're absolutely right. Forgiveness is a personal choice, and it's not something that can be forced or rushed.
Right. And in some cases, it might be safer and healthier to maintain distance from the harmful family member,
Yeah.
even if that means letting go of the hope for reconciliation.
That's a really important point. Protecting yourself needs to be the priority.
Yeah,
Sometimes that means accepting that the relationship might never be what you hoped it would be.
exactly.
Mm.
And that acceptance, while difficult, can actually be a very liberating experience.
Yeah.
It frees you from the burden of trying to change someone who might not be willing or able to change.
It's about shifting the focus from them to yourself.
Precisely. And that brings us back to the importance of self-care and self-compassion.
Right.
When you're dealing with a harmful family member, it's easy to get caught up in their negativity and lose sight of your own needs.
You end up giving so much energy to managing the situation that you deplete your own reserves.
That's exactly what happens. And that's why it's crucial to make self-care a non-negotiable part of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's taking time for yourself each day to relax and recharge,
Right.
engaging in activities that bring you joy, or seeking support from a therapist or counselor.
Okay.
It's about replenishing your own well of resilience.
It's about filling your cup so that you can cope with those challenges without completely draining yourself.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's not selfish to prioritize your own well-being.
Right.
In fact, it's essential
Okay.
because when you're feeling grounded and centered, you're better equipped to handle difficult situations and make choices that are in your best interest.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Mhm.
I'd love to hear your final thoughts on, what people can take away from this conversation.
Sure.
What are some key messages that you hope will resonate with our listeners?
Well, I think first and foremost, I want people to know that they're not alone in this.
Right.
Harmful family dynamics are more common than many people realize.
Yeah.
There's nothing to be ashamed of.
It's important to break the silence and realize that many people are struggling with similar challenges
Absolutely.
and seeking support,
Yeah.
whether it's from a therapist, a support group,
Yeah.
or trusted friends.
Is a sign of strength, not weakness.
I love that. And another takeaway that really stood out for me was the idea that knowledge is power. Simply understanding these patterns of behavior and the psychology behind them
Yeah,
can be incredibly validating and empowering.
it's true. When you can name it, you can tame it.
Right.
By understanding these dynamics, you can start to make more conscious choices and take steps to protect yourself.
And finally, I think it's so important to remember that healing is possible.
Yeah.
It might not be easy and it might take time, but it's never too late to start taking care of yourself and creating a life that feels safe, joyful, and authentic.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And remember, healing is a journey, not a destination.
Right.
There will be ups and downs, setbacks, and breakthroughs.
Yeah.
But with self-compassion support and a willingness to keep learning and growing, you can move towards a brighter future.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and insights with us today. This has been an incredibly enlightening conversation.
It's been my pleasure. I hope this deep dive has provided our listeners with valuable tools and a renewed sense of hope.
And to everyone listening out there, remember that you are worthy of love, respect, and healthy relationships. If you're struggling with a harmful family member, please reach out for support. You don't have to go through this alone.
And remember, you have the power to create a life that feels good to you, a life that honors your authentic self.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next week with another fascinating topic. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other.